You know what's overall great? NinjaGo! It has fun characters, cool action, drama, and great themes that kids and adults alike can enjoy. This theme about spitting plastic ninjas has truly become worthy of its unofficial title as Bionicle's true spiritual successor. However, it isn't perfect. Far from. However, what TV show really is perfect? That's the nature of television, really. You have to create so much content to span a certain amount of time that no matter how good 90% of the rest of your show is, you're gonna get a Love and Monsters or a Sunny Day in the Void episode occasionally. NinjaGo is usually a great TV show, but when it gets bad, oh boy, does it get bad. I'm not a negative person at heart. I'm usually a very optimistic person, look for the good in everything. However, I've taken a look at the top 10 episodes that NinjaGo has to offer, so it only makes sense that I also cover the 10 worst episodes that it has to offer. For this list, I'm taking a look at pretty much everything prior to Season 11, which is currently airing. So, yes, for this list I am going to be considering Day of the Departed, even though it's a special and not part of the official episode count. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm excluding Rebooted from the conversation, mostly because all 8 episodes would be on this list and it would just be a Rebooted hate fest. And as I said, I'm not a negative person. Plus, I've got other plans for a series of videos all about Rebooted, but we'll talk about that a bit later. For now, let's get started on this list, but before we do, I want to quickly say that even though I don't like these episodes we're about to cover and I think they're bad, I still love NinjaGo overall, and think that the writing team and producers do a wonderful job crafting the show. Like I said earlier though, in the realm of TV, it's hard to make every episode a home run. With all that out of the way, let's get started. Number 10, The Invitation from Tournament of Elements. I'm going to start off by prefacing that I don't actually think this is a bad episode. I just happen to dislike it. The reason for that being is that this is the season premiere of Tournament of Elements, so there's a lot of holdovers from Rebooted to be found in this first episode. With the death of Zane, the ninja are split and have gone their separate ways. Lloyd tries to bring them all back together and they find that they've been invited to a mysterious tournament. It's written well and introduces us to the idea behind the Elemental Masters, plus we get more of Sensei Garmadon and his newfound relationship with Lloyd. Rebooted left such a bad taste in my mouth that I just can't get into this episode up until the third act where the ninjas show up to travel to Chin's Island. It's honestly a good setup for the plot of this season given the events of the previous one, but because of how much I dislike the previous season and almost every story beat in it, I simply can't like this episode despite it being a good episode. So that's why it's on this list. For the rest of this video, I shall refrain from speaking ill of Rebooted because the other episodes on this list have nothing to do with it. So, moving on. Number 9, Endings from March of the Oni. As far as bad episodes go, this episode isn't really all that bad, but its rushed nature lands it on this list. March of the Oni introduces a lot of plot elements for it to juggle in just 4 episodes, and unfortunately it doesn't completely stick the landing. With Cole believed to be dead and the Oni marching, toward the Monastery of Spinjitzu, the ninja must reforge the golden weapons of Spinjitzu and save the day. Every plot beat that was introduced in the early episodes was paid off in this episode, but it happens so fast in such a back-to-back manner that it almost gives you whiplash. Jay and Nia get married, the weapons of Spinjitzu are forged, Cole isn't dead, Garmadon seems to have a moment of clarity and a love for his son returns, maybe, and the Oni are defeated, saving Ninjago City and the other realms. And all this happens in roughly 10 minutes. That's a lot to happen in a short amount of time. Thinking about the things as they happen on their own, they're good payoffs. Jay and Nia getting married during the big battle, Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann style, is very funny and fitting for them. Some emotions of old Garmadon returning and him helping the ninja is an interesting turn for his character that will make him interesting to see in the future. The golden weapons of Spinjitzu being back and the Tornado of Creation being used as a tool to defeat the Oni, the bringers of destruction, is great. Cole not being dead after all is a bit of a bummer, but happy endings. All of these things are good, but the way they're squeezed into a small time frame make the episode go by way too fast and you can feel it. If the production team had been given one more episode, they might have been able to spread things out and make these payoffs have a little more kick and feel more natural. And then on top of that, we have a legitimate cool scene between Lloyd and the first Spinjitzu Master and a purgatory state. As cool as it is to see, though, I wonder if the episode would work better if that sequence was cut so more time could have been devoted to spreading out the other stuff. It easily takes up close to 6 or 7 minutes of the episode's runtime, and in a 22-minute time frame, that's a lengthy amount. Because the season is already so abbreviated, this episode feeling sort of rushed also makes the season as a whole suffer, which is plenty of reason to add it to this list. Number 8 through 6, Darkness Shall Rise, Pirates vs. Ninja, and Double Trouble from Season 2. Like how 2 episodes of Sons of Garmadon were tied for my 4th and 3rd best episodes, these 3 episodes from Season 2 are all interchangeable on this list. A big reason is that these filler episodes from Season 2 feel a lot like a step backward or reset in terms of quality compared to where Season 1 left off. These episodes aren't necessarily bad per se, but something feels a little off about them compared to other episodes in this season and the previous. As I said in my season's ranking video, many episodes of Season 1 feel like a kid's TV show where the lesson of the week is blatantly stated at the end so even the thickest of kids out there can get it. After TikTok, this starts to change and the lessons learned are a little more subtle and told with subtext rather than being blatantly stated. With Darkness Shall Rise, it feels like we're right back to pre-TikTok and the lesson of the week is being shoved in our face. Of course, that still doesn't mean the episode is really bad by any means. Pirates vs. Ninja is really just a bit of silly fun with Soto and his crew giving us a prelude to Skybound to the Sky Pirates aspect, and I hadn't caught the funny Easter egg of the same office building getting shot up with cannons in both this episode and then later in Skybound by Nauticon's crew until I did my recent rewatch. Also, lots of Soto's crew are fun takes on the traditional pirate cliches. One guy being blind and being guided by a parrot that can't tell the difference between left and right is hilarious. Finally, Double Trouble is only really notable for being the creation of Cole's cake obsession in the fandom, one of his only true defining characteristics. It's sort of interesting to see the return to Darkly School for bad boys, but like the other two episodes, it suffers from the same issues. Overall, it feels like filler. There are brief advancements of the plot regarding Garmadon and his mega weapon, but unlike the earlier Season 1 episodes, it doesn't really feel like the plot is progressing any. Whatever enjoyment can be found in these episodes is sort of negated by this fact, and this also featured the debut of Dareth as a character. While Child's Play took advantage of his status as a filler episode and had some fun, these episodes unfortunately did not, and so they find themselves on this list. Number 5, Ninja Ball Run from Season 2. While the previous 3 episodes were really just kind of meh, Ninja Ball Run is the height of unnecessary filler. NinjaGo has always stood out to me from other kids' shows because it's first and foremost telling a story. It's not random episodic adventures like SpongeBob's or shows of that ilk. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with random episodic adventures either. Batman the Animated Series and Phineas and Ferb are two of the best animated shows out there, and they do this superbly. From the start though, NinjaGo has never been like this, so for it to stray from this can feel a little off, especially when it's also trying to tell its overarching story at the same time. The other 3 episodes I previously touched on from Season 2 had some form of sorta update to the story that kept it feeling as if it was somewhat progressing, and we just discussed why they didn't even quite achieve this. But Ninja Ball Run doesn't even have that. The ninja get the Destiny's Bounty back, which is nice, but that could have been covered in another episode with a brief statement that they rebuilt it. If the entire episode had been focused on reclaiming the bounty, then that would have been fine, but as it is, it feels more of an afterthought than an actual plot point. The writers realized they needed a way for the ninja to get to the Dark Island in a few episodes, and so they threw in that they got the bounty back in this one. I do sort of like the setup for this episode, that Garmadon has either bought off or threatened the firm in charge of Dareth's rent payment so the ninja will be out of a dojo to train Lloyd, but having a race through all the previous locations in the show with a bunch of previous used assets, this episode more than any of the others feels like the writers needed to fill time and threw this episode at the last minute when they were low on budget. And even then, there are a few good moments in the episode. Ed and Edna are always a joy to watch on screen, and it's nice that they gave up their fuel to help the ninja. We also get Garmadon's "over the side" meme line that is popular among certain members of the Ninjago community. Overall, though, this episode, more than any other Ninjago episode, just feels unnecessary, and so it finds itself in the middle of this list. Number 4, Secrets Discovered from Hands of Time. Hands of Time is really just a meh season in general, but there are 2 episodes that are really truly bad for one reason or another. Secrets Discovered is one of those. The big problem with this episode is Nia and her story across the season, as well as the emergence of Pixel as the new Samurai X. The fight between Nia and Pixel in the Samurai X cave is really confusing, as some of the dialogue stated doesn't make too much sense. Pixel does do a cool thing of switching between different voices to disguise her identity to both Nia and the audience at the time, but knowing what we know now, it raises the question if the writers always knew that Pixel would take up the mantle from Nia, or if that was something that became a thing later when the Hegmans came back. Pixel at one point emulates Garmadon's voice, trying to throw Nia off, but Nia states the obvious that he's gone for good at the time, and Pixel would know this since she was acting as Zane's AI at the time he did this. That's not something she would just forget, like Ronan's leg being broken, a fairly recent happening. Then there's Nia agreeing to the reason that she hid her identity as Samurai X was because her friends and loved ones would be at risk if her enemies knew who she was. That's not the reason she hid her identity, especially since her friends and loved ones are the ninja and were already at risk whether they knew who she was or not because both the ninja and samurai shared the same enemy at the same time, the Serpentine. Hands of Time was written by someone who, to my knowledge, had no prior experience in the world of NinjaGo and hasn't done anything in it since. Missing small details like this seems to be proof that they didn't do the most thorough research before writing. Then there's also the retcon of the symbol on the gong being at the blacksmith shop Kai should have recognized if it had indeed been there all along. Since it wasn't in the pilots and the story needed Kai to question where it came from, a simple flipping of the gong at the blacksmith shop to have it be on the backside would have been an acceptable workaround, but as is, it makes no sense. On top of all of this, Scales adds more backstory to the already sort of dubious timeline of the Serpentine Wars and the Great Devourer in terms of the Vermilion, and you've got a recipe for even more confusion. All of this really adds up to create a confusing episode that at this point has all been ignored because it's easier to forget most of what happened than try to explain away some inconsistent details. Because of this, here it is on the list. Number 3, The Attack from Hands of Time. This is really where Hands of Time started to feel iffy. The first 2 or 3 episodes were good, and given the amount of time in between releases of a full season, a little over a full year, it was great to be back in the world of NinjaGo. Then we get to The Attack, and everything just sort of unravels from there. The pacing for this episode feels off. It just seems to move in slow motion despite the entire episode being about a battle. Like the episode that comes after this one but precedes it in the rankings, there's a lot of little logic issues sprinkled in here and there. Something that bugs me about Hands of Time in general is why are the Vermilion a threat in the slightest? Sure, in really large numbers like an army attacking at one time, they would be a problem. However, most of the Vermilion stay on the ground while only a few are launched onto the floating temple island. I feel like a quick dash of Spinjitzu would take them out of the fight really quickly despite them being just a bunch of snakes in armor. And if not that, then why don't Nia and Jay combine powers to electrocute them like a few episodes prior? That worked pretty well. Then in terms of battlefield tactics, I don't think the ninja do that great a job, and they, specifically Lloyd, make bad decision after bad decision in this fight. Characters making bad decisions isn't necessarily a bad thing if it's in service of both the characters and plot. For example, Star-Lord losing his cool and pummeling Thanos on Titan in Avengers Infinity War was a really poor decision on his part, but 100% something he would do. Let's remember back to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, where Quill lit up Ego after the Planet Man admitted that he was the reason Meredith got cancer. Peter Quill is a character known for acting based on his emotions and not really thinking things through, so losing it and making the decision to attack the immobilized Thanos, disrupting Mantis' control, allowing Thanos to reclaim the Infinity Gauntlet was a bad decision that worked for the plot and the characters. There's no 3-hour sequel and #1 movie of all time record to be had if it didn't happen. In The Attack, Lloyd just seems to make bad decision after bad decision for no reason, especially after he's proven himself a competent strategist and leader in the past. Considering part of this season was dedicated to the idea that Lloyd was a master in training, this could be seen as a learning experience, but considering that plotline was dropped going forward and not mentioned again, it really doesn't work in the overall story, does it? This episode unfortunately doomed Hands of Time to mediocrity when it was looking somewhat promising beforehand. Because of that and the other reasons listed, it sits at number 3 on this list. Number 2, Day of the Departed. I had to talk about it eventually. It's not part of the official episode count, although maybe it should be to push the Enigma March of the Oni to episode 100, since Day of the Departed could be 2 episodes similar to the pilots. But if I didn't include it in this list, I really would have only had 9 episodes to discuss since I omitted Rebooted from the running. It's also hands down one of the worst pieces of content we've ever gotten for NinjaGo. Like the last episode of March of the Oni, it feels rushed as heck. Like Hands of Time, it wasn't written by the Hegman brothers, and it shows. Day of the Departed, much like Rebooted, seems to have been produced under a shorter amount of time than most other content for the series. The Lego Ninjago movie was originally supposed to come out in fall of 2016 when this special aired, but it got pushed to a year later when it, for better or worse, did finally come out. Because they couldn't release the wave of movie toys a year before the film came out, they had to have a replacement. So we get Day of the Departed. This wave of toys also had some Skybound-related sets that hadn't been included in the previous wave, probably because of how they were included in the show, looking at you, Mr. Lighthouse. The other sets that weren't Skybound-related were essentially Ninjago Legacy before Ninjago Legacy was a thing, since it was a reimagining of Ninjago's former villains and their minions. How do you work this into the story, though? The answer is, not very well. The special revolves around Cole, and the fact that he's so much of a non-character that his friends literally are starting to forget he exists. Ouch. Oh, and then there's also something to do with Sensei Yang. The plot of this special is super simplistic and at the same time makes very little sense. The concept behind what Day of the Departed is something that's actually really cool. Mixing and matching holidays from a couple different cultures, the people of NinjaGo take the day to seemingly ask for candy, remember their dead loved ones, and light lanterns to honor them. Everything involving the celebrations of this holiday are great and set a nice, bittersweet, melancholy tone. Zane remembers his father, Lloyd and Misako honor the lost Sensei Garmadon, Jay spends time with his parents, Nia and Kai go back to the blacksmith shop, and woos a cup of tea. It's a nice little tribute to NinjaGo up to that point, and I wish the special ended there, but we've still got toys to sell. So Cole starts to be forgotten and goes to Yang's temple to do something for some reason. I think maybe he thinks that Yang can undo the curse, or he may just be after revenge. It isn't clear. Anyway, Yang somehow unleashes a curse that allows the spirits of former NinjaGo villains to return to their bodies, including, for some reason, General Cryptor. Did he have a soul? Zane, I can understand having a soul since he's special, but Cryptor is literally just a robot. Then Pythor shows up and decides to throw his lot in with them, even though he left the ninja on pretty good terms last time we saw him. Each of their turned villains seeks out revenge against the ninja and depart to do so, and I'll admit, it's cool seeing some of these guys back. Or, well, I guess at least Chin. The ninja, of course, defeat their adversaries again in confrontations that are somewhat confusing. Some of them are fine, but Zane and Cryptor's fight is confusing because of how familiar they're treating each other, like they were arch nemesis during Rebooted, when Cryptor didn't really seem to have a specific beef with any of the individual ninja and more as a collective whole. It makes the confrontation seem a little out of nowhere, and Cryptor could have had just as much a reason to go get revenge on Jay since he and his troops were thrown to the scrapyard after the blackout. And yes, I know it makes sense to pit Zane and Cryptor together because they're both Nindroids, but the writing tries to make it seem like there's a personal connection between them when there's just not. On top of that, Pythor's fight with Lloyd doesn't make much sense and isn't very good. The way it ends is honestly hilariously bad. Pythor falls from a ledge at the Corridor of Elders, slithers away, and then Misako and Lloyd wonder if Pythor survived to fight another day, even though they were at a vantage point from where they should have clearly seen him slither off. Ronan also randomly saves Jay and his parents from Samukai with the half-hearted excuse given by the special that he was there to steal scrap to build a mech. Kozu and his men trying to get revenge on Dareth is pretty hilarious, though. Of course, while all this is going on, Cole is fighting against Yang and his ghost students. By the end of it, it seems like Yang isn't evil at all and made a mistake that unfortunately cursed his students, and all he wants for them is to be returned to living form. If that's the case, then what's the point of resurrecting the famous NinjaGo villains? All you need to do is lure Cole there with the close the circle thing and explain the situation that it would have been beneficial for him to help. Cole, if anything, is a nice guy. He'd help. And of course, the special infamously ends with Cole returning to his human form and no longer being a ghost, removing the one interesting thing about him. But he got lava arms as a trade-off, so yay? Honestly, for a special that's supposedly all about Cole, I feel like there's very little Cole in it. If one were to count screen time for each character in the special, I wouldn't be surprised if he has the same amount, if not slightly less, than the rest of the cast, with maybe the exception of Wu. For those of you out there that are big fans of Cole, I feel bad for you. For whatever reason, you find this character very endearing and connect with him to elevate him as your favorite, and the series constantly ignores him or gives him very little to do, not to mention character. I feel like the Royal Blacksmith is probably still the best Cole-centric episode, and that's from Season 1. Peekaboo from Possession might be a contender, but there's so much focus on the ninja as a group, and Ronan, I hesitate to call it his finest hour. Still, you Cole fans stay strong and keep doing you. Mathematically speaking, he'll get his due one of these days. Unfortunately, Day of the Departed is not that. It makes very little sense due to the rushed nature of the production behind it, and for a special all about Cole, it ironically made it a plot point that everyone was forgetting about him. I think that right there says everything that needs to be said about this special. The song of the same name by The Fold is fantastic, at least. Before we get to number 1, it's time for a dishonorable mention. The Way Back from Skybound. Like how I couldn't place it on my best episode list because of the division it's caused within the community, I have to mention it here because of how many people think it's a genuinely terrible episode. As I said before, if a single episode can ruin an entire season for some, then it probably needs to be considered for a list like this. I personally think it's a fantastic episode, but obviously a fair amount of people disagree with me. Number 1, Wrong Place, Wrong Time from Season 2. When I excluded all of Rebooted from this list, was there any other answer for the worst episode of the show? This is thankfully the last of the filler episodes from Season 2, and unlike Child's Play before it, it's a confusing mess that left me scratching my head after I watched it for the first time and for every viewing since. The plot of this episode is bonkers, and not in a good way. Garmadon, wanting to ensure victory over NinjaGo, uses his mega weapon to travel back in time to stop the ninja from assembling to stop him and his Skulkin army. In theory, this could be a fun look back at the two pilots, but it's anything but. Any problem any time travel story has encountered is on full display here, while also trying to pay homage to stuff like Back to the Future. Any one of the multiple doctors would have a fit with the time travel logic in this episode, and Doctor Who isn't exactly known for having an airtight timeline either. The big thing for me is really the ending. The ninja destroy the golden weapons in a point in the timeline that would make it impossible for Garmadon to use them to create the mega weapon, therefore undoing most of Season 2, and probably a lot, if not all, of Season 1 as well. That seems fine and dandy, as the timeline where this happened seems to be destroyed and the ninja return to the present where everything we saw still happened as we know it, but then we get a wrench thrown in the works. Lloyd has no idea what the mega weapon is, seeming to confirm that the ninja traveled forward in the timeline where the golden weapons were destroyed in the pilots and couldn't have been used during Season 1 or 2. That means that every episode we've watched prior never happened and some other turn of events happened, which is also reinforced and rebooted when they go to space to retrieve the weapons on the comet. I hate it. Okay, I lied. I still had some ill to speak about rebooted. Sorry. Okay, so I guess we're in a new timeline from here on out where Seasons 1 and most of 2 didn't happen. That's fine. Except then, in Sons of Garmadon, we learned that the Great Devourer still ran amok in NinjaGo City, and Garmadon stopped with the golden weapon so Harumi could idolize him and went to emotionally torture Lloyd. So that means we can't have been in a completely new timeline all these seasons, except that Lloyd still somehow has no clue about the mega weapon, which goes back to the new timeline theory and back and forth, back and forth. It's one big paradox.
This does not compute.
A few videos have been made trying to explain these time travel shenanigans, one of the most popular ones being by LQ from the BCC, but if your time travel is confusing to the point where people need to create videos to explain them, then you failed to tell a good story, and that is why this episode sits as the #1 worst episode of NinjaGo ever. Except, I threw out Rebooted when making this list. Because honestly, as bad as Wrong Place, Wrong Time is, I still think that Rebooted is much worse as a whole and in individual episodes. Through the 3 NinjaGo ranking videos I've done now, I've made my disdain for Season 3 pretty clear, and have even gone over some reasons why I hate it. In my Seasons Rankings video, I said I could dedicate an entire video to why I hate it so much. However, like I said earlier in this video, I'm not a negative person by nature. I think being negative is usually a big waste of time. Why bother complaining when you can do something about it? That's the attitude that caused the creation of Bionicle Reiterated, and that's the attitude that I'm going to use going forward in my next series of NinjaGo videos. It'll take some time to get it worked on, so I'm not sure when they'll start launching, but my next NinjaGo video will be the first episode of NinjaGo Reiterated, Rebooted. Unlike Bionicle Reiterated, which is a stop-motion retelling of the Bionicle Generation 2 story, I'll mainly be going over how to fix the singular plot issues of Rebooted and maybe add in some crude storyboard animatics to help tell the story. The reason I'm doing this is twofold. 1. Despite not liking Rebooted, NinjaGo as a whole is a great show and doesn't need to be completely rethought from the ground up like G2 of Bionicle did. The characters are well established and engaging, something that G2 was lacking that I've added in. Could you tell me who Golly was as a character from the 2015 animations in The Journey to One? Probably not. Could you tell me who Golly is as a character from just the first season of Reiterated? Messanak from TTV could when he talked about Season 1 of Reiterated on the TTV podcast on March 2018. Rebooted, nor NinjaGo needs that big of an overhaul to make it work. It basically just needs some large tweaks to make the story work. I'm not throwing most everything out. I'm more or less sticking with the plots and ideas presented and just changing some things around to where they make more sense and don't infuriate me. Rebooted can work on paper in bullet point form. It's how things play out and are executed that make it bad. 2, the other reason it won't be stop motion is because that would mean getting a new cast to play the characters, when the TV show already has a perfect cast that would be impossible to replace. Bionicle G2 didn't have a great cast of voice actors, even though they certainly tried their best. I blame the casting directors more than I blame the actors themselves. That meant it was easier to completely recast and rewrite the Bionicle characters because no one was really a fan of how the characters were presented in the official G2 story we got. NinjaGo is very much the opposite. When the LEGO Ninjago movie cast was announced and celebrities were voicing our favorite characters instead of their regular voice actors, Ninjago fans threw a fit. I was one of them, although I didn't publicly express my opinion at the time. I couldn't possibly begin to try and recast with mimics, so I won't bother and I'll just do bad impressions when required as I walk us through the rewritten story. Also, making it stop motion would require collecting a bunch of old sets from the aftermarket that I don't have the funds nor the room for. And I'm also busy working on other stop motion projects that would take precedence, so there's that. My plan as of now is to do a video for every episode of Rebooted, but I may end up combining 1 or 2 episodes into a single video, we'll see. I'll make sure to have several in the can before I start uploading so they can be released on a weekly basis, which means it'll be a while before this starts. Make sure to follow my Twitter and Instagram accounts for updates, and I'll of course release a trailer announcing when things will start rolling out. I know I've gained some newer subscribers as of late because of these Ninjago videos, so I'm making sure to have some stuff in the pipeline for you guys. I hope you all stick around and enjoy everything else my channel has to offer. Until then, what do you think the worst episode of Ninjago is? Not your 10 worst episodes. What do you think the worst episode of Ninjago is? I'm curious to see what you guys think. You can include Rebooted in your list, an episode from Rebooted in your list if you want to, or you could very well put the Way Back from Skybound on that list. I totally understand. I don't agree, but I understand. Let's just, of course, as always, make sure to make the comment section as civil as possible. So, until next time, I'll talk to you guys later.